Hey everybody, I'm here today with the author of this book, Brian Platzer. Brian is the critically acclaimed author of the novels The Optimists, Bed-Stuy's Burning, and The Body Politic, as well as the parenting book, Taking the Stress Out of Homework. He has written frequently for the New York Times, NewYorker.com, New York Magazine, The New Republic, many other publications. As a humor writer, Brian has frequently written for The New Yorker's Shouts and Murmurs and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. And as an educator, Brian teaches 8th and 12th grade English at Grace Church School in Manhattan. He is also a CNN contributor on education, contributor. Uh, Welcome, contributor and author extraordinaire Brian Platzer to the podcast. How are you?
I am so thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of yours and of the show, and I've been looking so forward to this. So thanks so much for having me on.
Well, you're so welcome. And listeners, you should know that we tried many different ways to make this happen, and we finally landed upon today at noon in New York City. So here we are. Um, I think what I'd love to do, since The Optimist is your newest book to come out, and maybe today we'll focus on that book and a little bit on how you became a published author multiple times at this point. But what I love to do, especially with authors, for folks who haven't read the book yet, well, stop listening, go read the book, and then come back. But maybe if you could just share a short synopsis of The Optimist, just to get the conversation going.
Absolutely. So, the narrator of The Optimist is a man towards the end of his life named Rod Keating, who has been an eighth grade English teacher for his entire professional career. And he is based on a real man who's really named Rod Keating, who is my seventh and eighth grade English teacher. When I first met him, I was blown away by his charisma and love of literature and enthusiasm about his students and his subject matter. When I graduated from my MFA program, came back to the city, I was in desperate need of rent and health care, and he shoehorned me in back to my old school where I was lucky enough to be a colleague of his for a few years. He became a mentor of mine. We sat in on each other's classes. He essentially taught me how to teach. He became a good friend, was a reverend in order to marry me to my wife, a week after which he had a massive stroke and was never able to communicate again. So I went from being his student to his friend and colleague. And then for the last 10, 15 years of his life, I visited him and he was unable to communicate. And I would read to him and talk to him and tell him about, our former students and what was going on in my life and my children and everything else. And I would come home and I would write. I guess I would just write what I imagined was going on in his mind, in his head. So when he passed, after 10, 15 years of that, his stepson came to me and said, like, I know you're a writer. Would you ever consider writing about Mr. Keating? And I didn't tell him that I already had, 800 pages of imagination in there. But I started thinking about what would it be like if he were able to be the sort of dynamic entertainer at the end of his life by telling a story that he was during the core dynamic years of his life. So this book is a purely fictionalized account of his attempt to entertain a reader by telling the life story of his fictional most extraordinary student, a girl named Clara Hightower.
How extraordinary to be able to honor someone you loved and revered in the way that you did this real person, and then create out of your imagination like this really beautiful work. This world that this teacher teaches at is very specific to the New York
Yes.
the private school landscape, although I think relatable to many, many people, whether they have feelings or thoughts about that system, even not being in it, or what it is to grow up in it. And one of the things that really struck me is this idea, and I think this is a universal question, is what I do meaningful? right? Like past the moment of doing it. And I think a lot about teachers. My daughter has this extraordinary piano teacher, or she did, from kindergarten through her senior year of high school.
That's
And
amazing.
I remember this woman said to me once, and this woman was like, a muse, a second mother, a confidant. I mean, all the things that a great teacher can be. And she told me she sees almost no one after they graduate from high school. So here's this person who like is a guide for all of these years. And once they graduate, it's like they graduate from her life as well. And I found that shocking. And so much about what this book really speaks to is during these middle school years where you are having you in real life, Brian, as a teacher, this
For
teacher
sure.
in your book, it's like you are in the trenches day after day with these people on the verge of adulthood, right? At this very incredible moment in their lives. And so, what does that mean? Like, what
Exactly.
are
I mean,
here?
this book has allowed me to think so much more about that sort of existentially than I ever had before. And it's such an intense, I don't know, contrast or multitude of emotions where, you have these kids often for 9 months of their life, and it feels so important to them, to have that relationship with you as a teacher, but it also feels so important to you. I mean, it's your professional mission to give the students everything that you can pedagogically and psychologically and emotionally and in all these different ways. And the intensity of that relationship can be life-changing, in unfortunately negative ways, often ideally in positive ways. And then the
Right.
kids graduate and move on. And I put in Mr. Keating's voice in the novel, that ambivalence that he has in running into students after teaching them, with that sense of like, you do want to see them, do want to find out what's going on in their lives and find out, a little bit selfishly, like what, if any, influence you've had. But after mattering so much to each other in that moment, coming back 5 or 10 or 15 years later, it's weird to be confronted with this kid who's like now, 22-year-old, and you're saying things like, "So, do you still play soccer?" When like he doesn't play soccer. You just remember
Right.
that's the thing about him, that so does your mom still have a sister in Virginia? Just like things that don't matter at all, because what you want to say in that moment is like, remember how much we meant to each other for that 9 month period of time. And it's a very unusual, unique, intense relationship that then you end and start with a new batch of kids immediately after. And from Mr. Keating's perspective, the fictional narrator of this book, at the end of his life, because he has so much time and is trapped inside his body, and unable to articulate all of these thoughts, he becomes obsessed is too strong, but he becomes fascinated by this idea of like, what is his legacy, and like, what effect has he had on his students, and how much do they owe him, and how much is it just sort of a nice but very fleeting relationship that he needs to let go of.
Well, in this story, I mean, there's so many characters, but you mentioned Clara, who's in this book. There is this student, Clara,
Yes.
is going to take that ball and run with it, and then Clara and her boyfriend, Jacob, who are also at the center. What grade are they in when we meet them?
Well, when we first meet them, they're in
Little.
kindergarten,
Yeah,
right? When they're just like little kids scampering around. But then when we
right,
really spend time with them and they get to know each other at a deeper level, they're in eighth grade. They're 14
right,
years old.
right. When they're like, young lovers, as it were,
Exactly.
and the whole school is obsessed with this
Yeah,
couple. And it's part of the teachers' lounge, and Jacob's mom is a teacher at the school, so it has all this stuff going on. Um, and Clara does, for a minute, end up being a very celebrated human being in the world. And this idea of when that happens and when you have proximity to someone like that, everyone wants to take a little bit of credit, right? Or everyone hopes in terms of
exactly.
the
Exactly.
meaningfulness of it. Um, and I wonder how much I mean, I know this is fiction, but I did get a sense that, well, I'm going to I'm going to change gears for 1 second. In the structure of this book are jokes, many jokes, some corny, some hilarious,
Yes,
right? Some would seem like dad jokes, some you'd be like, I'll tell that joke.
exactly.
There's a teaching style that your protagonist has that's very endearing. And he certainly likes to think, and some kids probably would agree and some wouldn't, that this is like I'm a great teacher. They love me. I do this thing
Right.
and I'm like the best. Do you think the kids think he's as funny or interesting as he thinks he is? You were a student of Mr. Keating's in real life, right? So what's your take on that?
My take is that kids never care about the performances of the adults in their life as much as the adults
Right.
want kids to care about them. Like I,
Correct.
my 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 thought on Mr. Keating as performer, as joke teller, is that in order to be a great teacher in his mind, there is a performative quality. I think all great teachers have a performative quality to them. I think the joke mechanism I enjoyed because it was a way to demonstrate that type of performance on the page in a way that it's very hard for a character to express his own charisma as a narrator. But when
Yeah.
I figured out that he could tell jokes to the reader, that approximated some of that charisma and let the reader try to see how desperate he was to entertain. From the kid's perspective, I do think that the real Mr. Keating students learned a lot and were fascinated by him, but probably less for reasons that Mr. Keating thought that he was fascinating. It's not that all the jokes landed or that he was, inspiring everybody. It's that, I mean, I remember when I was a student sitting back and thinking like, this is all kind of odd. Like this is a strange way for an adult to be teaching kids. Like before him, the teachers in my life were intimidating is the wrong word, but they sort of existed to me as adults I wanted to please and not be yelled at by. But I saw there was something a little bit different about Rod Keating in real life that he put more of himself into the room and he would, sort of rewrite Shakespeare as he was, marching up and down the aisle and accusing us of killing Julius Caesar. And in the moment, it was embarrassing more than anything else. There was sort of a cringeworthiness to it. But then when I became his colleague and I saw how many hours of work he put into each class and how much attention to each student and how much sort of preparation he needed in order to feel confident coming into that room. And then sometimes throwing away all the preparation if there was something a kid wanted to talk about that he would then get into. I think that it was successful almost in spite of itself. And I see that in a lot of my colleagues, honestly, where the tricks and the grad school techniques and everything that they think is what makes them a good teacher is sort of table stakes and somewhat important. But what really matters is that they get along with the kids, and whether it's the exact way that we hope to get along with the kids or not, who knows? But it's a bunch of eccentrics who want to hang out with, eighth graders and it lands for reasons almost in spite of the preparation as opposed to because of it.
Right. Uh, another part of Mr. Keating's classroom is something called
The Ember exam.
The Ember exam. And that is a real like cornerstone in his classroom that some kids fear, some kids ace, but your character of Clara gets 100, right?
Yeah.
Gets a perfect score. Is this a real thing?
So this is something that I extrapolated from a series of questions and answers that the real Mr. Keating had us very excited about, where he had 100 questions that he wanted us all to memorize. His theory was that if by the end of his time working with us, we as students knew the questions and answers to these 100 rules, we then had the basics, the fundamentals of essay writing and reading and criticism and journalism that we would need for the rest of our academic lives. You mentioned that Clara was the only one to ace it. And getting back to the question that you were going to ask me earlier on, I wanted to demonstrate in this book Clara as an extraordinary person, but also as somebody who needed to contend with the potential that everybody was putting on her and the anxiety that comes with that potential. That, yeah, she was a great kid, but she was still just a kid, and teachers, and I hear it in the teacher lounge sometimes where my colleagues and I are thought, that girl, let's call her Clara for the sake of not, saying a real girl's name. Like, she's such a great kid, like she's working so hard, she's doing so much. And the pressure that I think we accidentally put on these students to manifest that greatness, or, when they're told all you need to do is work hard enough and the world is yours. I think that's exciting for a kid, but it's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly difficult for somebody who's told that they can accomplish anything they want to go and figure out what it is they're supposed to accomplish. Because you've lived a multifaceted, successful life in some way. I've had my own successes and failures, but very rarely does one feel like, yes, I am living the correct version of all of the different variations that my life could be. And I think as teachers, as parents, as mentors, a lot of us feel like it's our job to give that gift to students, the sense that the world is yours. All you need to do is work hard to achieve. And that can lead to real anxiety in students who are then forced to go try to achieve it.
Right. I wonder, you talked about when his son came to you and was like, do you think maybe you could write something about my father? And you're like, how about here's 800 pages
Yeah.
so far. Um, Tell me about, do you like, what's your style when you write? You've written many books now, but do you outline the whole thing? Do you have a wall covered in index cards? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, so I begin with a character. In previous books, that character was more like me. In this book, the character was a version of Mr. Keating. And I put that character in a world where he or she needs to make some sort of decision. He or she wants something, and then there's an obstacle to what that person wants. And then, based on his ability to overcome that obstacle, new obstacles and new characters arise. And I follow almost the energy of that process until I run out of obstacles and energy. So the first draft of a book will be a total mess of 400 pages of just like things that a character wants to get, what's preventing that character from getting it, the other characters that come in as obstacles or helpers. And then I have this sort of mess of 400 pages. I printed it all out, I read it, and I figure out where the plot is, meaning like what the actual goal that is going to be the main sort of excitement or driver through the novel for the reader, and I get rid of everything else, and I then map out the sort of beats of those moments. So in this book, what that was it was a simultaneous attempt to have two goals accomplished. Mr. Keating, having suffered the stroke, working on this device where he can look at a screen for 4/10 of a second at a letter, which will then process a word on another screen. The two goals are, one, he is trying to write a novel, and two, the characters of Jacob and Clara are trying to live their lives and potentially fall in love. And those were the coinciding obstacles, the coinciding plots that drive momentum forward. So a typical book is maybe like a will they or won't they type experience. This, I tried to have the will they or won't they layered into a can this narrator successfully tell an entertaining story given the obstacles that he is facing?
Well, Yes, you did. I mean, I this book came to me, through a mutual friend who was like, "You're gonna love this book," and I really did. I mean, you've written
Oh,
a page turner. You have written exactly the kind of book I love. It just has people who feel like people you know, and then you're introduced to people that you wish you knew. It is hilarious. It is moving. It's dealing, we are all dealing, if you are a certain age, you are really sandwiched between losing the older people in your life and raising your own children. And and also really, I've done hundreds of interviews, and there is always a teacher in almost every artist story who
yeah.
saw them and encouraged them and gave them permission to like pursue the dream. Sometimes it just took that. It didn't come, the call did not come from inside the house, right? It
Right, right.
comes from outside the house and the impact of that. And so just this kind of reverential irreverence for teachers is what I would say. It holds all of it. It also, is someone who's been a student, you've always wanted to know what happens in the teacher's lounge, right? You always fantasized about, I mean, to your point, if you saw a teacher on the street with someone from their own family, it would be like seeing your therapist.
Right, right. There's something almost like inappropriate about seeing a
Like
teacher
you
out in
miss
the real
them,
world.
you
No,
don't miss
I've
the
seen
classroom.
I have walked down the street and I've seen like a block or two away a student see me and have like a moment of and some of them like run up to me and ask me how I'm doing, but I've also seen kids just like run away. Like just didn't, there was a 15-year-old who just ran into a liquor store once and I'm like, how is this like but I get it because I have the same feeling when I see them. I'm like excited to speak to them, but in the same way, like I don't want to put on the teacher routine or the I guess that's not as generous as I want to be to myself. I don't want to demonstrate out when I'm my real self, this sort of teacher affect and the parts of myself that I let them in on in the classroom, but the real people connection versus the classroom connection is also something that's fascinated me for years that I wanted to write more about. So I'm so excited that all resonated with you.
And it resonated so deeply, and it also just, the idea you're also writing about someone who's experiencing everyone's worst fear, which is to be trapped in your own body without language, without an
Yes.
ability to communicate. And at first, there's technology that I'm sure is well researched, and I've known
Yes.
you a minute. I know you're an accurate person. But then it only works so long. And then just that really terrifying, what if I were to be trapped in my own body and with no one who can hear me? And there's also like, I'm just saying this out loud for people who I want them to go get the book. There's just this beautiful way before he gets sick that he relates to so many people in his life. And he's a great partner. He's in a really beautiful relationship. And you really also see what it is to care for each other in sickness, not just and in health, in a very deep way. And there are also these like Raphael painting, of these young lovers. And there's
Yes.
so much to it. And the competition in the world of teaching in schools and fundraising and all that,
Yeah.
because it's a business at the end of the day, and that's what you really see in a private school, especially. I mean, I imagine in your life you've wondered if maybe teaching in a private school versus a public school challenges you in some way. As a human, I would just imagine you have feelings about that or thoughts about that.
Absolutely. I mean, my sister, with whom I'm very close, is the principal of a charter school in the South Bronx, who, many of her students are experiencing homelessness and, has an entirely different role in education from mine. And I often think that it's a cop out to teach the students I teach, right? And that like the real moral way to live one's life is to do what my sister does. And I do think there's an element of hypocrisy that I just enjoy my job so much that it's not public service so much as it's the way that I choose to spend my time. And I also just don't feel like I have the skill set that my sister has. I think they're almost different jobs,
Yeah.
that there are spectacular educators who are able to devote themselves to the pedagogical necessities of those who need the most. And then there are those people, and the job is also called teacher, right? Who maybe is in more of the entertainer, inspirer, high level of literary analysis realm where I feel more comfortable. And I definitely feel guilt when I'm forced to confront, the role I'm playing versus that of what my sister is. But they're two different jobs, and everyone does a different job and
Yeah.
plays a different role. And in terms of the stamina that I have and my skill set, I do think that I am far better at this one than I would be at the other. And I have incredible admiration for those who are able to succeed in that other realm.
Well, I think I told you in the meta of it all, I bumped into an old friend recently whose son had been your student. And he was like, oh my God, he was my so to the question, do you stay with them? Yes, this was 10 years later. And he was like,
Oh.
and the mom was like, oh my God, Brian Platzer, he was in our house. It was like, one of the Backstreet Boys was. I do want to ask you about this, which I know
Please.
is what you aspire to be.
I was gonna say that was always the goal.
I don't know where that came from,
I
but
love it. I love
it's
it
out
that
of my
that's
head. It is the Optimists, not the
yeah.
Optimist. And I want to talk about the title for a moment. Was it always called the Optimist as you were working on drafts?
No,
Plural.
it was initially called a happy ending because I knew very much that the story that Mr. Keating would want to tell is not going to be a downer. That in his mind, he wanted to entertain the reader, that he wanted to tell this story. If he wasn't able to tell his own love story about, his relationship with his wife that you mentioned so eloquently earlier, he wanted to tell a love story and have it all. I don't think I'm spoiling so much to have there be joy at the end as well
Yeah.
as in tandem with his suffering. But as I was writing, I saw what I first dismissed as a ridiculously corny poster in my faculty lounge with just the slogan or the phrase "teaching is the greatest act of optimism," and I kind of rolled my eyes at that, thinking like, why? Why is teaching any more necessary, for optimists than like dentistry, like manual labor, anything else? Like we're all optimistic when we sit down and do a job. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about my colleagues who have, the new set of students every year, and my sister who has the new school of students every year, I think that to be a good student, a good teacher, you do need to be uncommonly optimistic. And that worked so well as a double meaning with Mr. Keating at the end of his life, where, as you say, he's suffering really the greatest tragedy a lot of us can imagine, being himself, but unable to make human connection for the last 10, 15 years of his life. And yet this manuscript that he's writing is an act of optimism in and of itself. So I think yes, there's cynicism throughout this book. There are people who are trying to fundraise for their own ego. There are people who are trying to take Clara's success and have that mean success in their own lives.
Right.
But through all of those cynical moments, I hope that a type of optimism can shine through.
Well, it does. It's really, I mean, the ride of what ends up happening to Clara and how Mr. Keating ends up being involved with her in her life again. Um, it's just also like it's like a thriller also. I mean, there's so many things kind of woven into this book. Um, I loved it, and I'm so
Thank you.
grateful it was sent to me and that you as an author are now very much on my radar and I get to share you with others. And that there will be more books from you in my lifetime is something that makes me feel optimistic about things I'm going to get to read in the future. So I wish you tremendous success with this book. It looks like it's really connecting with a lot of people already.
Thank you so much.
Of course, before I let you go, is there a little known fact about you that you can share?
Sure. Well, I was gonna say something else as I've heard previous episodes and been thinking about this, but now I think I should talk about my sister. So a little known fact is that I live in a brownstone in the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn, and it's my two sons, my wife, myself in sort of the middle unit, and I got sick for a while and needed some help. And my closest friend moved into the upstairs unit, and my sister, who's a single mom, is living in the bottom unit. And we all live as though it's a sitcom from the 1970s here. And my kids go down and take care of, help out with Ella, who's just turned 2.5 downstairs, and my friend upstairs is, baking everybody breads and pastas and helping take care of my kids and my sister's kids. And it's other than the teaching and the writing, it's the great joy of my life that I get to share, a home with so many loved ones in a way that I feel so many people aren't as lucky to have, especially as you talk about, being in that sort of sandwich generational age where it's so exhausting taking care of your own
Every
kids and your parents and your loved
yourself.
ones and your colleagues and yourself through all of this.
Oh,
That a
right.
little known fact about me is that I've created a little world unto ourselves in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where I'm
Okay, that
happily hiding out.
I'm so, I'm not a jealous person, but I'm so jealous of that. Brian Platzer, thank you for coming on Little Known Facts. What a wonderful way to spend some time on a Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This exceeded my incredibly high expectations. I so
Oh.
appreciate it.
All right, well, so I got like 100 on the Ember exam, is what you're saying.
Exactly. You are the new Archon.
I'm so glad. All right, have a great day, and I hope to see you soon.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.